Hey everyone. The Switch 2 has been out for a while now, and the library is actually in a decent place. I've been going through a lot of these games and wanted to put together a list of the ones worth your time and money. So let's just get into it. Star Fox is a full remake of the N64 Lilat Wars. New voice acting, orchestral soundtrack, completely rebuilt visuals. The story is the same. Fox McCloud and the team taking down Dr. Andross, planet by planet. The branching mission paths are all still here. So there's replay value if you want to go back and find the alternate routes or chase medals. Developed by Velen Studios, the game targets 60 frames per second and mostly holds it. Docked output sits around 1080p to 1440p, with dynamic resolution handling the busier particle effects. There's a 4 vs 4 online battle mode that's genuinely fun, and co-op splits pilot and gunner duties between 2 players using the Joy-Con 2. It's a short game, a couple of hours for a full run, but it's tight, well-made, and it feels good to finally have Star Fox back. If you grew up with the N64 original, this is worth picking up. If you didn't, it's still a solid introduction to the series.
Beginner's luck. I've got eyes on a high-value target. Follow me.
The Adventures of Elliot, The Millennium Tales. This is from the team behind Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default, and it's their first game with real-time action combat instead of turn-based. You play as Elliot, an adventurer in a world overrun by beast tribes, and the main mechanic is time travel. You move between 4 different time periods, and your actions in the past ripple forward. The combat lets you carry 2 weapon types at once, swap between them freely, and enhance them with fragments you find in dungeons. It plays somewhere between a classic top-down Zelda and Ys. The HD 2D art style looks great, as always. The story is a fairly standard save-the-world setup, but the time-spanning structure gives it some genuine emotional weight by the end. Faye, your fairy companion, can be controlled by a second player in co-op. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. A talking encyclopedia called Mr. E lands on Yoshi's island, and Yoshi dives into its pages to study the creatures inside. The gameplay is built around experimenting. Eat a creature, throw an egg at it, jump on it, carry it somewhere, and every interaction reveals something new. Each level is self-contained, and the puzzle design rewards curiosity. There's no real threat, no big villain. Bowser Jr. and Kamek show up, but more as background nuisances. It's calm, low pressure, and the animations are genuinely charming. Developed by Goodfeel, it runs at a smooth 60 frames per second on Switch 2 with clean visuals throughout. If you have kids or just want something relaxing to put on, it does its job well. It's not for everyone, but it's a polished game that knows exactly what it's trying to be.
Thanks to them, we were able to break the rock. It looks like there are still lots of unusual creatures residing within the
Splatoon Raiders, the first Splatoon spin-off, and it works a lot better than you might expect. You play as a mechanic who ends up stranded on the Spearlight Islands with Deep Cut Shiver, Fry, and Big Man after a helicopter crash. Their goal is to loot treasure to pay off a massive debt hanging over Splatsville. The gameplay is PvE raiding, waves of increasingly tough salmonids, weapon and gadget upgrades, island-by-island progression. The story does a solid job developing Deep Cut, who felt pretty thin in Splatoon 3. Co-op supports up to 4 players locally or online, with difficulty that scales based on squad size. Performance is one of the highlights. Solid 60 frames per second throughout, with dynamic resolution even when the screen is packed with hundreds of enemies and ink flying everywhere. If you've always wanted more from Splatoon's single-player side, this is it.
But the Salmonids aren't the only powerful ones around here. Through battles, you, the mechanic, will also get strong.
Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This came out on Xbox and PC in 2024 before Machine Games brought it to Switch 2 this year. It's set in 1937 and tells a new indie story that fits between Raiders and The Last Crusade. Troy Baker plays Indiana Jones and does a good job with it. The gameplay is first-person exploration, stealth, whip traversal, and punchy hand-to-hand combat across locations like the Vatican, Egypt, and Southeast Asia. The puzzles are solid, the globe-trotting structure feels authentic to the films, and the John Williams score is woven in throughout. On Switch 2, it runs at a locked 30 frames per second in both handheld and docked 1080p docked 720p handheld with DLSS. Machine Games chose 30 frames per second deliberately to maintain visual quality on par with other versions, and it mostly pays off. There's some minor texture pop-in in open areas and a slight reduction in NPC density, but neither is noticeable if you're playing it fresh. Mario Kart World is the Switch 2 launch title, and it justifies that slot. The big change is the open world courses are interconnected across a larger map, with mountains, cities, and forests, and you can actually drive between them freely in the roam mode. Races now support up to 24 players. New mechanics include wall riding, rail grinding, and multi-jumps to reach higher paths. The Knockout Tour is a 24-driver elimination format that's chaotic in a fun way. Technically, it's one of the best-looking games on the platform. Nintendo confirmed 1440p/60 frames per second docked and 1080p/60 frames per second in handheld, both locked. It doesn't use DLSS, just the raw hardware, and it holds those targets cleanly. The single-player side is lighter than previous entries, and there's no story mode, but the combination of online, the open world, and the number of courses gives you a lot of longevity. Pragmata is Capcom's new IP, and it's worth talking about. You play as Hugh, a guy in a spacesuit stranded on the moon after responding to a distress signal, and he ends up bonded with Diana, a small android girl who can hack robots. The combat is third-person shooting, but the hacking mechanic changes how you approach it. Aim at an enemy, and Diana starts passively breaking it down, which opens up options you can exploit mid-fight. The relationship between Hugh and Diana carries the emotional weight of the story, which is quieter and more grounded than most Capcom games. The Switch 2 version is the roughest technically on this list. It targets 60 frames per second, but the docked experience fluctuates between 30 and 55, depending on what's on screen. Dense outdoor sections are the worst. Internal resolution docked is around 540p, with DLSS upscaling to approximately 1080p.
Take this!
Square Enix put Remake on Switch 2 in January 2026 and followed it with Rebirth 5 months later. Rebirth is bigger in every way. Where Remake was set entirely in Midgar, Rebirth opens up into large regional areas. The Grasslands, Junon, Costa del Sol, Corel, and more, each with their own side content and optional activities. Cloud's party is chasing Sephiroth across the planet, and the story goes to some genuinely interesting places, though it also gets deliberately complicated in ways that'll divide people. The battle system is refined, and the character-specific mechanics are fun to learn. On Switch 2, it runs at 30 frames per second locked, same as Remake. Combat stays stable, but larger open areas like the Grasslands and towns like Calm can dip. Resolution is dynamic, minimum internal, around 540p docked, with DLSS reconstruction, and handheld is noticeably softer with some artifacting. Mina the Hollower. You play as Mina on the cursed Tenebrous Isle. She's a professional hollower, which means she can burrow underground to dodge hazards and reposition mid-combat. The combat is whip-based with a Castlevania feel. The exploration is top-down Zelda style, and there's a light, Souls-like pressure where death has consequences. The island is built around a hub in Ossex, with distinct areas that unfold as you progress, full of secrets and layered boss fights. The tone is darker than Shovel Knight. It has a genuine gothic atmosphere. At $20, it's also an extremely good value. On Switch 2, the game runs at 120 frames per second in both handheld and docked modes, with HDR support and Joy-Con 2 mouse controls. Load times are nearly instant. For a pixel art game, 120 frames per second is not something you expect to notice much, but it makes the combat feel noticeably responsive. Dragon Quest VII is one of the longest games in the series, and the original PlayStation version was brutally slow to start. This reimagining fixes that. The story is presented as a series of self-contained vignettes with a connecting narrative, and the main story has been streamlined without gutting the content. You play as a fisherman's son who discovers a portal to the past and finds that entire civilizations have been sealed away by an unknown force. Restoring them one by one across different time periods is the core loop. Toriyama's character designs work beautifully in the new diorama art style. The battle system has been updated while keeping the classic turn-based structure. On Switch 2, it runs at 60 frames per second, with consistent frame pacing. The Switch 1 version was 30 frames per second with stutters, so the difference is real. It's still a 60 to 80 hour JRPG, even with the trimming. If you're a Dragon Quest fan who never got to this one, now's the time.
Blueprints shadow dropped on Switch 2 in March 2026. It's a first-person puzzle roguelike where you're trying to find Room 46 inside an estate called Mount Holly. Every run, you draft rooms from a randomized selection, build a path through the mansion, and try not to dead-end yourself before you run out of steps. You collect keys, coins, and clues along the way. The thing is, Room 46 is just the surface. The game is full of deeper mysteries that emerge as you play, about the family, the house, and things you won't even know to look for yet. It genuinely expects you to take notes. The puzzle design respects your intelligence in a way that's pretty rare. On Switch 2, it runs at 30 frames per second at 1080p, not ideal. But this is a slow first-person puzzle game where frame rate doesn't really matter to the experience. Joy-Con 2 mouse support works well. Docked on large screens, the image looks a bit soft. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade sits above Rebirth on this list because it's the more complete experience on Switch 2. The port is clean, 30 frames per second locked at 1080p docked, stable throughout. Square Enix included everything: the Yuffie episode, all summons, and a new streamlined progression option that lets you boost EXP and AP gains, activate permanent max HP/MP, and skip grinding if you just want to experience the story. The combat real-time action with ADB strategic layering feels great on the Pro Controller. The story is set entirely in Midgar and does a lot of interesting things with the source material that fans still debate. Playing this portably is something that shouldn't be possible given what the game looks like, and the fact that it runs this well is genuinely impressive. If you haven't played either game and you own a Switch 2, start here.
Never seen this defense system before.
Thought you were the expert.
So what's your brilliant plan, genius? Damn it!
Capcom's director said publicly that they were skeptical this would work on Switch 2. Then it did. Requiem stars Grace Ashcroft, an FBI analyst who is actually scared a new kind of protagonist for the series. Her gameplay is methodical and tense, careful inventory management, crafting, survival-focused in the vein of RE2. Leon Kennedy is a second playable character, handling more RE4-style action sections in denser environments. The tone shifts between the two, and it mostly works. Performance targets 60 frames per second, and gets there in Grace's contained environments. Leon's outdoor sections are where the hardware struggles. Docking can drop into the 40s or lower in the roughest sequences, and handheld has a worst case around 25 frames per second in one specific early sniping section. Internal resolution is around 540p docked, upscaled to approximately 1080p via DLSS. A patch could help the Leon sections.
He can fire from a distance using handguns and rifles, or use an enemy's weapon against them. Leon has a
Pokémon Pokopia. You play as Ditto, transformed to look human, in a world where all the humans have vanished. The goal is to restore abandoned islands and build a Pokémon community from scratch. The mechanics borrow from Dragon Quest Builders and Animal Crossing, gathering materials, crafting furniture, building homes, growing food, attracting new Pokémon. As more Pokémon join your utopia, they teach Ditto new abilities that expand what you can do. The loop is genuinely engaging, and the story, though simple, has a quiet charm to it. Performance is a relief after some of the entries on this list. 60 frames per second locked in both docked and handheld. Clean visuals, no noticeable drops even with large, decorated islands. For Pokémon, that's a historic achievement. The DLC is already rolling out with new zones. This is a game people are going to be playing well into 2027. Donkey Kong Bananza. You can punch through virtually any surface. Floors, walls, ceilings, and the levels are designed around this, constantly.
DK is trying to reach the center of the Earth to find enough Bananium to wish for unlimited bananas, which is exactly the kind of motivation that fits the character. Pauline joins the story. The underground biomes are visually distinct and get increasingly creative as you go deeper. Technically, it targets 60 frames per second at 1080p to 1200p docked with dynamic resolution, and 1080p in handheld. It skips DLSS in favor of FSR1, which means image quality on large screens is softer than it could be. Boss fights with heavy destruction physics can drop to 30 frames per second, and Nintendo acknowledged this. They said they prioritized gameplay feel over perfect stability. That's the right call, because the destruction system is what makes the game feel different from everything else out there.
The library is in a solid place, and there's more coming. If you think something should be ranked differently, or you think I missed something worth covering, drop it in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.